Hello, all. My name is Natalie Vasquez, she, they pronouns. I'm a senior women's gender and sexuality studies student at UConn. I'm focusing on decolonizing pedagogy, embodied learning, healing, and Chicana feminist theory. I am thrilled to speak with you today, Nicole.
I am so honored that you are interviewing me for this class, for this conversation. I'm really excited.
Hello, my name is Jesus Arias Abad. My pronouns are he, him. I am a PhD student in literature, cultures, and language with a concentration in Spanish literature. My research interests include Latin American cultural and literary studies, Andean studies, the colonial thought, and the history of political ideas in Latin America. And I am eager to learn from this interview.
And my name is Elia Medina, they, them pronouns. I'm a lifelong performer, instructor, and scholar. I'll be graduating with a master's in political science under intersectional indigeneity, race, ethnicity, and politics, as well as a grad certificate in women's gender and sexuality studies this semester. Nicole Perry is a certified intimacy director and intimacy coordinator for the stage and screen, and author of Careful Creativity in Theater and Dance Education, Consent Forward, Trauma-Informed, Psychologically Safe Movement Pedagogy. As an educator, scholar, dancer, and choreographer, Nicole describes her work as research on the intersections of bodies, power dynamics, consent-based practices, and creativity, centering our living forms as vessels of meaning, values, and norms. Disputed territorial objects mediated by systems of power and control in struggle with human desires for self-determination and intimacy as sites of both violence and joy, oppression and freedom, alienation and connection. Nicole Perry is revolutionizing education in her book. Given the strong tendency for the university as a national mainstream institution to prioritize white, cis, heteropatriarchal, Euro-American ways of knowing, developing embodied, trauma-informed, consent-based, decolonial, and feminist pedagogies across disciplines remains an urgent topic to address widespread censorship and regressively propagandizing educational institutions across the United States. This is particularly egregious in K through 12 education, but increasingly includes colleges and universities, places where more advantaged students enjoyed opportunities to encounter broader perspectives and suppressed knowledge, often for the first time. The ability of young people to access truthful histories that include not only diverse voices and perspectives, but also methods and grounded in these various communities, provides deeper engagement with transformative ideas that promise a more equitable and free future.
Without such information, techniques, and tools, education remains broadly inaccessible to variously minoritized populations for many reasons, including the gatekeeping of knowledge through hegemonic English high literacy as the sole means of transmitting and producing scholarship. This normative way of learning is particularly out of reach for myopic, disabled, blue-collar, undocumented, queer, neurodivergent, and low-income communities, including embodied and not literacy-based forms of education that center non-Anglo-European ways of knowing, and including other narratives, allows a diverse student's body to develop transdisciplinary strategies that can democratize the classroom and offer productivity challenges that are beneficial to young people in general in numerous ways.
In her book, Perry discusses theory and teaches praxis. As we study political thinkers like Angela Davis, Bell Hooks, and Audre Lorde, we engage with thinkers who write about body autonomy, violence, and embodied trauma, and violence, and who wrote from direct experience of facing actively resisting oppression. Perry's work teaches how to make the classroom a space that will not reproduce harm under the guise of intellectual rigor. She teaches how to decolonize academic spaces by making psychological safety a political commitment and recognizing the harm that in educational spaces is not incidental, but shaped by the same colonial and patriarchal power structures these thinkers critique. Nicole, on behalf of Iria Medina, Jesus Arias, and me, Natalie Vasquez Rivera, thank you for your time and willingness to share your work.
Thank you for having me and for that lovely introduction. You all can always write my bios.
So my first question is, where does safety begin in a classroom setting?
Safety begins in the classroom setting in the hands of the teacher. I mean, I think there's a larger scope of the institution, and is the institution even a safe place? This came up as we were talking this week about, like, I live in Florida and state institutions I don't think are safe places. I worked most recently at a state institution where I'm very glad that I don't work now, because its president is a former CEO of a for-profit prison company. And I don't know how anyone could feel safe walking onto a campus knowing that that is the leadership. So I think the institution has a larger hold over safety, but in each individual classroom, the teacher creates that safe space. And I talk a lot about empowerment. And so many teachers are like, oh, I want to empower my students, and how false that is. Teachers don't empower students. To say that teachers empower students would be to deny that students are powerful beings already. Power is not something we grant with our magic wands and decide who gets it and who doesn't. Instead, teachers are in a position to use their power granted by the institution to create places where students can practice their power. And that's a quote unquote safe space. I don't think there's any such thing as a safe space. There's spaces that we're constantly trying to make safer. And the way that we do that is creating opportunities for students to practice their power, to use their power, to be reminded that they are powerful beings.
Nicole, what advice would you give to teachers who want to create safer and more inclusive learning environments?
I think there's a variety of ways teachers can come into it, and it is really thinking about also what's sustainable for you as a teacher. We can look at all of these different ways and go, oh my God, there's so many things, which can feel overwhelming. And so just pick one thing. Just pick one thing that you're going to do. And in my book, I have a different chapter for different things. Like, there's one chapter all about the syllabus. There's one chapter all about classroom experiences. There's one chapter all about the use of touch, because I'm writing specifically about dance and theater classes, in which touch is often a modality of teaching and of learning. There's a chapter on grading. There's a chapter on feedback, both from the teacher and from the student. So teachers can do all of those things, and gosh, I hope they do. But to pick one thing that feels approachable and sustainable, and to not look at your pedagogy and go, I have to throw out everything. Look at all your lesson plans and be like, I have to throw it all out. You might, but you don't have to start there. You can start with one thing. Is it making an accessible, inclusive syllabus? Is it shifting to ungrading practices or co-grading practices? I write about that too in the book, that I didn't get to ungrading until several years after I started co-grading. It was a slow move continually to more and more equitable practices, but also untraditional. And I have to fight for this and explain this to my department chair as a real thing kind of practice. So they just pick one thing, and it can be a small thing. It can be a small step, and just start.
What practical and concrete steps can educators apply from your frameworks and concepts to facilitate engagement with and conversations about difficult but urgently important topics and conversations? For example, race, misogyny, sexism, xenophobia, genocide, etc.
I think creating inclusivity in your classroom is the way to address all of those things by not addressing all of those things, by being like, oh, what if we treat everyone in this space as if they are fully human and believe that they are fully human, regardless of race, gender, ethnicity, age, size, anything. If this is a space for humanity, it's a way that we are addressing that without saying the things out loud. I write in my book about dance technique and decolonizing dance technique by refusing to use ballet terms in jazz class. Jazz is an African American creation. To continue to use ballet terms would be colonizing and erasure of its history. And so by not using those terms, I can help to credit the history of where it comes from, and actually crediting the history of where it comes from. When I teach a jazz class, I spend the first half of the semester on what are the roots of jazz. Same for modern. Modern was meant to be the antithesis of ballet. Why am I using ballet terms in modern? Sometimes it's because those modern choreographers use them, and then we can situate things in their proper context, and context matters. And when we're teaching, I think this is maybe the practice that is applicable everywhere, question mark. Theater, dance, other subjects, is reminding students of their context, and that their context and experience informs what they see. You know, I quote Brian McLaren, who is a theologian, but he says, what you pay attention to tells you what you miss. And I think about that a lot also as a movement artist. Like, the things that I see mean that I'm not seeing something. And so I do with students in a choreography class, in dance appreciation, in theater appreciation, this exercise I call story people, that's in the book. And it's these blob people. It's like a big circle, that's the head, and the oval, that's the body. Like, they're just shapes, but they're shaped like people, and they're engaged in these activities. And in one of them, one person is standing and has their arms open wide, and the other person is standing across from them and has their arms on their hips. And the first thing I ask students to do is to just objectively describe that picture. And from that very first exercise, so many students are creating story. Oh, somebody's mad, somebody's yelling at this person, like. And then sometimes those stories are filled with gender, race, age, that is not at all implied by these literal shapes that we've stuck together, because people are coming with their own experiences. And it's such a great exercise to do early on, to remind us how much we carry with us, that even when we think we're being quote unquote objective, that we are bringing our own lenses and experiences, and we're interpreting, especially artwork, but the world around us through those lenses. And we need to be aware of them. Like, unconscious bias is a real thing, and it isn't always a bad thing. It just says that we have preferences and opinions that we have not examined, and we should examine them. And so it's a way to get started down that road of, what are the things that I believe are true? What are the things that I'm taking for granted that I don't even know about?
So, speaking of bringing in our own lenses and perspectives, the concepts of power, consent, and trauma are explored in women's gender and sexuality studies. And as we navigate topics such as race, gender-based violence, and systemic oppression, I've noticed that students get triggered, and oftentimes this leads to students to leave the room, and unfortunately, they're left to deal with their PTSD on their own. Could you tell us a bit about how we might prepare ourselves and or our courses as future educators to create not only a safe environment, but one that is conducive to growth, healing, and community building?
Hmm. One tenet of trauma-informed teaching is and consent. I always say trauma-informed and consent are not like circles that you might get a Venn diagram between. They're just one big circle. Because if you've experienced trauma, you didn't have a choice. No one chooses trauma. You had choice taken away from you. So to offer choice in how we engage in that material can be one way of approaching those activating subjects from a more trauma-informed lens, like, or just having the information so students can make that choice of, today we are going to be talking about these things. What do you need? Like, I have Barbara sitting over here. Barbara goes with me. She's in my like intimacy kit, and she goes with me as just like a little soft squish. And I have fidget rings. They spin. They're like, do you have tools like that as a teacher for your students that they can bring in? I was at a university a couple of weeks ago doing a faculty workshop and a student workshop, and we talked about that in the faculty workshop of like, oh, maybe we actually need some STEM toys in the dance studio as a way for students to deal with some of that energy when they're starting to feel activated, but they're not yet at the space where like, I have to leave the room, but I need something. Do I need a little comfort squish? Do I need a place to put this energy? I have a bag full of those like plastic popper things. Those always came with me when I was teaching class. And is it that we can support students in dealing with that activation early before it gets to the place that we need to leave the room? And if they have the information of like, oh, today we're going to be talking about these things, then I can also prepare myself before I come in of like, this is going to be maybe challenging for me. Maybe I bring my own tools that I know work for me to stay grounded, or maybe I give myself some kind of time goal of like, I want to be in it for at least 30 minutes. And if I can stay in it for 30 minutes, I can go step outside, get a sip of water, and then come back in. They can start to set their own conditions for how they want to engage with things. And I also ask teachers to talk about exit strategies, like as a real thing of like, if we're going to be talking about this sensitive topic, whatever it is that can be activating, you might have to leave. So then what? And when I'm doing workshops, I do mention that at the beginning, like, we're going to be talking about power and consent and touch and bodies, and you might have to leave. And I just ask that when you leave, if you just need to leave for yourself and you are okay, you just need a minute, just give a peace sign on your way out the door and be like, I'm cool. I just need a second. But if you need somebody to come check on you or somebody to come sit with you because you are actually not okay, just do this as you come out the door, or like hold your hand out so somebody knows that they should come after you, so that exit strategy is built in. And I've acknowledged as the teacher, you know what, this might be activating. And if it's activating, I'm not going to be surprised by it. I don't want you to be surprised by it. I don't want the class to be surprised by it or making up stories about what's going on. We have a way to deal with that here. And here are a couple steps for dealing with that. And I also include in community agreements when I'm teaching, I use a triangle as the template for community agreements. And it's just, in this space, I will honor myself, others, and the space. And then we talk about what that looks like in this class or workshop or whatever we're doing. But one of the points under honoring others that I always bring up, because it's right before I do the exit strategy business, is we're not going to make up stories about what other people need. If somebody's sitting out today in class, they're making the choice that is honoring to themselves, and I don't need to know what that is about. If somebody steps out of the room, they're making a choice to honor themselves. They might be getting a sip of water. They might be going to the bathroom. They might be activated. I don't need to know that story So that's one of our things of honoring others, is we just don't make up stories about other people. And then we go into exit strategies. So I've layered it in to the material of, yeah, we're going to do hard things, and we have a way to deal with hard things. And when it comes to content, like in an arts classroom where I'm teaching, we might be doing material that's activating. Students might create dances purposefully that are activating. Students do that often. Actually, they're making dances based on their own experiences, that they're working through some harm or some trauma that has occurred to them. And we have a conversation about what is it that we're saying about this art, that yes, this was an experience that you had, but now you're making it into art, and what are you saying about it? Because you cannot heal it. Healing might occur as you make art, but that's not usually the purpose of art. That's like a drama therapy, dance therapy kind of thing, and that's not happening in my classroom. So that's not the purpose of this. So what are you saying with this piece of art? And what are you saying that's new? Because reliving this is also not going to facilitate your health or well-being in any way. So what are you saying that's new about this? And then if students are able to reflect on that, that can be very helpful to then catalyzing that material to become art rather than become something that continues to activate. And we also talk about closure practices. How do we leave it behind? And content advisories. If I'm going to make art that is on a sensitive topic, to be a responsible creator, I also have to take care of everybody else in this space. So we'll have content advisories of, you're now going to see this piece about this sensitive topic. So there's a lot of strategies we can have, and they require me as the teacher to have those strategies and to take the time to scaffold them into my class from truly day one, with those community agreements and exit strategies. And then as part of my structure for creative time, if that's the kind of class that I'm teaching, of this can happen and this is how we're going to deal with it.
How do you envision dance as a decolonial and feminist pedagogical tool in college environments? And what would you say are some of the greatest benefits that students reap from taking dance?
I think it's really ironic that dance is like, your body is your instrument. You have to know your body. You have to use your body. And then at the same time, we are often like, but please ignore it. And please don't do anything that's good for it. Like eat less, work more. No, you can't go to the bathroom during class. No, you can't get a drink of water during class. Oh, it hurts? Suck it up. Just push through it. Oh, it's an actual injury. Okay, you can sit out today. Like that, we're constantly trying to have the body both ways, and that we cannot. And so I think that's the first flip for dance to really being decolonized, non-hierarchical, non-patriarchal, is to say everyone has agency over their body and making their choices that are right for their body. And dance is a way to own that and explore that. And even in those times, like codified technique class, like if I'm in ballet class, I do have to do a specific technique, but I can still be thinking about how that feels in my body. What am I learning about myself as I'm doing this step? And that's one of the things that I focus on when I'm teaching dance, is that I have never taught in a conservatory setting. I've always taught in a middle school or a high school where dance is an elective that students have chosen as their art credit, or in a liberal arts college setting where students may be dance majors or minors, and they again have mainly chosen to be there, and that their goal for their dance degree is maybe to open a studio, maybe to teach, maybe to go on and perform or choreograph. I have a lot of students that have done like crossover degrees with dance and business because they want to, have a studio space, and some folks who have it with like dance and exercise science to be a physical therapist or something. So they're looking at dance already theoretically as a holistic part of their education in those settings. So the way that I teach it is to ask students to think about what are their goals. And that's part of why I'm able to do ungrading is I give them a list of things plus a space for other where they can create their own, where they're setting their goals for the semester of like, what do I want to learn from dance? Do I want to improve certain technical aspects of like centering or alignment? Do I want to get a triple pirouette? Or do I want to learn to take feedback? That's a great life skill. I would love for people to learn that. Do I want to support my peers? Okay, great. Like those are all things that we can do in dance class. And by shifting the focus off of, I have to look as much like someone else as possible, or I have to look as much like an objective standard, which is not at all objective in Western universities. Those are Western standards. They are European aesthetics. Ballet is literally European aesthetics. Modern dance was informed by that. Jazz, unless you are getting some rooted jazz, authentic jazz with history, often still comes back to ballet aesthetics, and it's taught that way. So we're often taking these bodies and holding them to Western aesthetics, whether or not that is correct for the art form. And by making it about student goals, we can start to shift some of that. And again, by giving things their proper context. Ballet is European. It is from a certain time and place. We don't talk about that enough. About it has these certain values because of the time and place it's from, not because these values are better than the other values from modern or jazz. And I have a joke that's not a joke with some colleagues this year about like, you want to start a fight on the internet, just hop on and be like, ballet is not the foundation of all dance. And you can have fights for months on months on the internet, people popping into your comments to tell you why you are wrong about that.
I love that so much. I just have to say, relating to everything.
Yeah, absolutely. So how does consent and trauma-informed teaching unsettle hierarchies and power dynamics?
Mm-hmm. If I acknowledge the power dynamics that exist as a teacher, I am already starting to mitigate them just by making them transparent. Part of why power dynamics hold power is because we leave them unexamined, undiscussed, unopposed. We're like, that's the way it is. That's just the way it is here. That's the way it's always been. And we just let it continue to exist instead of going, I wonder if there's a different way. And moving from power over to power with requires us to expose those power dynamics and to mitigate them as much as possible. And I say as much as possible because they don't go away. Like in, again, a Western university setting, we still have those power dynamics of teacher-student. And it doesn't matter how collaborative I attempt to make my classroom, or how transparent or how trauma-informed I attempt to make my classroom. Those titles still exist, and therefore they still affect the relationship of me to students, and therefore it is still a power dynamic. And that's how I define a power dynamic, is anything that affects a relationship in a context because we want that relationship to function with a certain status quo. I say yes to the teacher because I want the teacher to give me an A, because I want them to like me. I say yes to my dance teacher because they have a company outside of here and they might hire me if they think I'm good to work with, things like that. So like these relational influences are really power dynamics. So they exist, but what we can do is attempt to mitigate them. And as we mitigate them, we move towards that circle of consent and trauma informed because other people are able to practice their power. Power with was coined by Mary Parker Follett in 1929 in her book Creative Experiencing. And I love to talk about Mary Parker Follett because we don't talk about her enough. She was a woman writing about power and politics in the 19 teens and 20s. She wrote a book about the position of the Speaker of the House before women could even vote. But she examined this position and was like, this is what a good Speaker of the House would do. I would like to recommend that book to everyone in the government. But her book Creative Experience was written about her work as what we would now call like a social worker in Boston, where she ran the community center. She oversaw all the community centers of Boston. And she was looking at how do we get these people to really work well together? And she wanted very much to take her ideas into business, but she was a woman writing in the 1920s about how these ideas were playing out in education and community. And so business people were not taking her very seriously. She also had this wild idea of power with that in the 1920s people looked at and went, communist, let's shut that down. And she also was a woman living with another woman in the 1920s, and people went, ooh, maybe her morals are not what we want to bring into our spaces. And so they continued to shut her down. And here we are almost 100 years later with me going, gosh, I wish you'd all would read some Mary Parker Follett, because she had this great idea of power with back in 1929, where she says, like, it's about integration. It's that we still all need these roles. Students actually need a teacher. I, as a teacher, actually need students. It's not that one of these roles is more important or better than the other. We need each other to exist, and we need each other to show up in their full power in their roles. I need students to come with their power. I tell them often, like, you are experts in your body. I'm the expert maybe in this material, but you're the expert in your body, and I need to know how this is fitting in your body. What are the sensations? What are the questions? What's your experience that you're bringing to this, that context, that lens that you're seeing through that gives you something to share in class that we wouldn't learn without you here, or some question to raise that we wouldn't think of without you here. Like, please, please, please bring that to class. And that's where we're creating power with, which is then collaborative and gives people space to say, no, maybe I don't want to do that. Is there a different way to do that? That doesn't feel safe for me. What if we did it like this? And if we don't start by mitigating those power dynamics, we will never get to the space where people feel like it is safe to say no.
Nicole, how do you see your work contributing to broader conversations about power, care, and gender in education and performance?
I think these conversations, Mary Parker Follett was, again, a community worker who wanted to be taken seriously in business. When I write and when I teach, I quote her, I quote French and Raven, who were some foundational thinkers a solid 30 years after Mary Parker Follett, let's be clear, but their work is more famous because they were men. I make sure to cite these things. Like, there's not a workshop that I do that does not bring up both of these folks and the fact that French and Raven's paper has been quoted and cited a bajillion times, even though it's 30 years older than Mary Parker Follett's, who still doesn't get the attention that she deserves as a foundational thinker on how power plays out between people. I also talk about ungrading as being one of those spaces where we really disrupt power dynamics, and that can be done in any class. In, like, I know math, you kind of have to have like right answers, but and like chemistry, like, I don't know, if you were doing your medical school practicum thing, I would probably want you to like have right answers, but there are still ways to diffuse the people-pleasing power of grades and the traumatic power of grades, and find ways to collaborate with students about that. And I think there's space in so many subjects to talk about how do we mitigate power dynamics? How do we share power with students, with colleagues? Theater and dance in general, as professional practices, like to talk about themselves as collaborative art forms when they absolutely are not in most practical cases. The director is still there telling the actors what to do, and the actor's like, I thought no. There are many directors who are collaborative, and there are still many who are not. Same with film directors and dance choreographers. I joke that there are some directors who think when they say thank you for being so collaborative, they're giving you a compliment, but they're not, because what they actually meant was thank you for being so cooperative, and that is not the same thing. Those are different things. So I think there is space for all of these ideas to move into other subjects and other fields. But it is one of the reasons that in my book and in my workshops, I quote sources who are outside of theater and dance, because I also know these theater and dance teachers who are reading this book are then going to have to go to their program heads or their chairs and be like, I want to try this on grading thing. And they're going to have to explain it, and their chair might not be from their discipline, or the chair is going to be like, cool, you have to take it to the provost, and the provost is actually a computer engineer who's going to be like, that sounds real squishy, why would you do that? And they're going to have to explain it. And so I use these sources from sociology, from business, from the whole psychological safety scaffold. Just saying business, that's reminded me, like the whole psychological safety scaffold comes from Amy Edmondson originally, who is a Harvard business professor and business scholar. That term came from her. And so we have other fields that we can look to support these things that we're saying. Like, I am not actually the rebellious artist over here. I'm actually the well-read artist who is like, hey, other people are doing this. What if we just integrate this in? And I see how this can work over here. Let's do it.
What would you tell the mainstream institutional university about the importance of embodied learning and trauma-informed, consent-based decolonial pedagogies, not just within dance, but across disciplines?
One, embodied learning is the only thing that AI cannot replicate. So I've been saying this a lot recently too. I'm like, all of my teacher colleagues are like, I'm getting so many AI assignments. I'm like, oh, then you are not doing embodied learning and reflecting, because I was getting some AI assignments until I went, how do I not do this? Oh, I have to ask people to reflect on the actual things that are happening in class, that are only happening in class and are not happening on the internet, and their sensations and how that ties into their goals and their experiences, because they can't get any of that from AI, because AI doesn't have goals or experiences. It just has things it can pull off the internet and regurgitate back to you. So if you really are serious about having students not use AI for assignments, do some embodied learning and then ask for your assignments to be about the embodied learning. If you are interested in decolonizing any classroom, embodied learning is a way to do that. The Western institution values the written word, which so do I. Like, I wrote a book. I obviously think that it's important, but that book is also about how to replicate some of the embodied learning experiences so that people can take them and do them in their classrooms, because we put so much primacy in Western institutions on thought, and forget that thought happens inside a body. Thought doesn't happen in a jar somewhere. Thought doesn't happen on the internet. It happens inside our bodies. And when I'm thinking, I'm also feeling. and what am I feeling? And when I'm thinking, it's happening in a body that has had other experiences that are informing my thoughts, all of that context and lens stuff from earlier. Those thoughts didn't come from nothing. They came from my experiences and previous learning. So to think that our body doesn't affect our thought is silly. Like, just also think about the class that's like right before lunch. Like, you just stop having thoughts because all you can feel is that you're hungry. Or that study that they did about like juries, that you're more likely to be found guilty if it's right before lunch because people are hungry and they just want to go like get lunch. I might be misquoting the study, but there's a legit study about like the time frame of when a jury is making decisions based on bodily sensations. Like, our bodies affect our thoughts. If we're in pain, it affects how we're able to focus and think. So it's very silly to think that our bodies aren't affecting our thoughts, or that we're having clear thoughts only without having a clear connection to our body. So if decolonizing is of importance, what are ways that we can do embodied learning across any and all subjects? And embodied learning can be like, let's get up and move, let's be in our body. But it can also be, what are the sensations you're having when we talk about these things of like power and consent and trauma? What are those sensations that are making you feel like maybe you want to leave the room? Can you sit with that sensation and just be with your body? Sometimes it's, am I in a space to learn? I talk about check-ins in my book of like the first 2 minutes of class are just a check-in of energy up or energy down. What do I need today to learn? Do I need to bring my energy up because it's right after lunch or it's the first class of the day? So maybe I take those 2 minutes to do the Pilates 100, or to walk around the room, or to listen to a song on my headphones that like pumps me up, or I don't know, something that gets your energy up. And if your energy is already up because you couldn't find parking and then you ran across campus to get to class, or like you narrowly avoided an accident on your way to class, or maybe your energy is really, really high and you just need to bring it down to be able to focus. So maybe you take 2 minutes to sit, to breathe, to stretch, to listen to some like yoga music on your headphones. Like, I give students those 2 minutes to just check in with their body, to be like, what do I need to be in a learning space? You could do that in any class. That is a way of saying you're bringing your whole body to this experience, even if it's a math class where we're going to sit here and do problems. What does your body need for you to be able to learn? And if we get used to checking in with our bodies, maybe we'll get used to checking in with our bodies like in spaces outside of here, or thinking about like, oh wow, what if I just took a deep breath right now? I'm really noticing my energy being up. If you know that you're going to talk about a hard topic in class that might be activating, maybe you do a group regulation where everybody takes a deep breath together at the beginning, and maybe partway through, and maybe at the end. Because regulation, even though we talk about it's my nervous system that gets dysregulated, it then affects every other nervous system in space. We actually share regulation and dysregulation in community. So having that moment of breath and connection together could also be a way of doing that. If you're in a gender studies class and you are going to be talking about something that is hard for many of those people in that space, let's take a moment to be regulated together and to support each other's regulation and make that a part of learning.
These are all wonderful ways to interrupt these internalized capitalist, patriarchal systems that are
Just do it. Just get
dehumanizing.
it done. Just,
Yeah.
we only have 50 minutes in class. We better get through it.
Yep. A lot of burned out students and teachers out there.
Well, I had a very famous acting teacher say to me once, like, well, if the student's having a trauma response, they just need to push through it because it's going to make them a better actor. And I said, well, if a student's having a trauma response, they're not actually learning. And if they're not learning, that means you are not teaching. So what are we doing? What are we doing in this class? Well, wasting everyone's time, it sounds like. In addition to causing harm, none of us are doing the things that we're here to do. So let's just find a better way so we can say that we actually taught and learned things. Even if you don't believe trauma-informed is an actual thing, which she did not.
Yeah, it sounds like a lot of people buy into the no pain, no gain, and if it doesn't hurt, it's not real.
Yeah.
Well, I just want to say, on behalf of Natalie, Jesus, and myself, thank you so much for your time and for sharing your work today. We wanted you to have the last word. So to close, is there anything we didn't ask you that you'd like to share, or anything that you would like to say to our listeners as we wrap up this wonderful conversation?
It's just that as we're teaching, as we're creating, as we're learning, as we're entering space with other people, whatever that is, there is no one way to like do it right. And there's no way to guarantee that we're not going to cause harm or we're not going to experience harm, because we're sharing places with other humans. All humans are messy and bringing their own experiences and their own priorities to space. And even when we show up with the best of intentions, and everyone shows up with the best of intentions, harm can happen. And because harm can happen, it's why it's so important to give ourselves structures to mitigate that as much as possible. Like, where are the places that I know could be harmful, so I can try to pull that back, control those variables as much as possible. So if it happens, it's because it happens. It's not something that I've neglected as a teacher to care for. And then if it happens, how do I deal with it? Am I prepared to deal with harm in my space, to create accountability? And especially if it's me as the teacher creating that harm. Do students really feel that I can be accountable for those mistakes? Because that's also part of mitigating power dynamics, is that I have to be able to be wrong and to have someone who is still over me to create that consequence of, okay, maybe it's an apology, or maybe it's you don't get to teach that class anymore, or that there are those, and there's some place to move forward to. Because to me, the purpose of accountability is always to restore community. And that's always my goal when harm occurs in space, is like, what do we need to move on? Not to move on and pretend that it never happened, but to move on together as a community. How do we still keep our community, our learning community in a classroom, intact? How are we still able to learn? And so part of having strategies and structures from the beginning is also remembering to have a strategy and structure for when things go wrong, and to not beat yourself up when things go wrong, because things will go wrong and it will feel terrible. And it is part of this wonderful human mess that we are all in together. And it's part of being in community, is saying things will go wrong and I still care. I still care for our community. I still care for you. I still care for me. How do we continue care even though harm is a reality?
Well, I think with that, we can all, I don't know, do you want to do a round of applause, everybody? Seems like the right thing to do. Unmute yourselves so that Nicole can hear our
Yeah,
appreciation.
thank you so much, Nicole. Wow,
Thank you.
that was very impressive.
Oh, thank you.
Nicole, that's amazing. You know, like I have your book. I am.
Send me a
I've
picture
been-
of you with your book, so for my next, because the 2-month anniversary is on Monday. So I'm going to do another round of like.
Okay, absolutely. I've been reading through this, and I have to say, as an undergrad who's been searching for a way to make safe spaces, and like I hadn't heard the concept of a psychological safe space. Like, you made this distinction between safe space and brave space, and I really appreciated that. And I just want you to know that this is a book that I'm going to be quoting in my papers, and I'm going to be like telling everyone, you have got to get this book. You've got to read this book. I absolutely, like I mentioned in a message to you before, I love the voice. I love the strategy of dividing the book from theory to praxis, and how you're not just proposing oh, here's what's happening. No, you're saying, here's what's happening, here's why it's happening, and here's how we can fix it. And you're teaching teachers how to decolonize not just theater, because I know that your focus is in theater and dance education, but this is something that, we can apply this into, academic spaces, and to women, gender, and sexualities, and basically any classroom that you want to decolonize.